guess I was gonna say, I remember this saying that. Just jumping up right up there. Must think the conductor's crazy at concerts. That's a good question.
He keeps looking at me like, short straw. Oh, you're right.
Good evening and welcome to the main meeting of the Granville School Board of Education. Please rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you very much. We've got a full evening of accommodations and events for the school board, so let's get started with your roll call, please.
Mr. Miller?
Here.
Mr. Wolf?
Here.
Ms. Deeds? Here. Mr. Cron?
Here.
Ms. Shaw? Here.
And for the approval of the agenda, there is an addendum, and the actual agenda needs to be modified. One name needs to be stricken. So, as amended.
Motion. So moved.
Second.
Roll, please.
Mr. Wolf?
Aye.
Ms. Shaw? Aye. Ms. Deeds? Aye. Mr. Cron?
Aye.
Mr. Miller?
Aye.
Great. We can start out with accommodations.
Excellent. We love a packed house here. This is fantastic. So we do have a lot of students we'd like to commend for outstanding accomplishments tonight. A few of these students have a 7 o'clock concert. So we are going to be very quick in our process. So first group we'd like to commend are our GHS choir, orchestra, and band students for qualifying and placing in state contests, as well as their directors, Kristen Snyder, Samantha Schnabel, Jared Smith, and Andrew Crum. We'd like to recognize the following groups for their placement at the OMEA state contest, which were held this spring. Symphonia Orchestra received a superior rating. Prelude Orchestra received a superior rating. Wind Ensemble received a superior rating. Notice the trend. Advanced Treble choir received a superior rating, and treble choir received a superior rating. We will also recognize two groups of students, our all-state choir consisting of Anna Belt, Isabella Busak, Lillian Reese, Sophia Schinka, and the all-state choir consisting of Ellie Hu Van Reeth, and Avery Temple, and Owen White. So all those students representing all those music groups, if you were named or are here as a representative, please come up at this time.
No, everybody who was part of the group.
Wait, what? No, I don't think it's. I don't.
So you got no hands.
No, bro.
All right, now, let's form a blob that can
There we go. There we go.
All right, you ready?
Yep.
Just a little bit wider. All right, 1, 2, 3. Got it.
Okay, congratulations. Now, I know some of you might be named later, so you might have to hang around. Now we'd like to recognize two GHS students who qualified for the AMY test. The AMY test is an intermediate math exam between AMC 10th and 12th grade and the USAMO, which is USA Math Olympiad. AMY is intended to provide further challenge and recognition for high school students who have exceptional mathematical ability. The AMY is a 15-question, 3-hour exam. Sounds like fun, right? In which each answer is an integer between 0 and 999. The questions on the AMY are difficult, and students are very unlikely to obtain the correct answer by guessing. Calculators are not permitted. AMY provides the exceptional students who are invited to take it with yet another opportunity to challenge their mathematical abilities. AMY is a means towards furthering mathematical development and interests. The real value of the exam is in the learning that can come from the preparation beforehand and for the further thought and discussion of solutions after. Congratulations are in order for Andrew Harms and Luke Hand. Very proud of them. So.
Got it.
Okay, congratulations. Andrew, don't go far. Come back up. All right, so additionally, we'd like to take this moment to congratulate Andrew as he was selected as the OESCA Licking County winner for the 2023 Franklin B. Walter Award. Franklin B. Walter All-Scholastic Award was created in 1990 to honor Franklin B. Walter, one of our past Ohio State superintendents, and to recognize one of Ohio's top student scholars from each county in Ohio. Franklin B. Walter served as state superintendent from March of 1977 until 1991. Throughout his career, Dr. Walter has exemplified concern for young people and has dedicated his life to the improvement of education in Ohio. Andrew was honored as this year's award winner, and we'd like to congratulate him as well. And by the way, Dr. Franklin Walter was one of my first professors at Ohio State, so this is a very special award. Congratulations. We're doing pretty well. All right. Now like to recognize the GHS competition cheerleaders for qualifying and placing in the state meet. The competition cheer team, coached by Misty Baker and Ashley Vogelmeyer, qualified for state where they placed 7th for Division III. Their nickname is the Mag 7 for their small but mighty team. The members are Ellie Holbert, Ella Jump, Elena Kale, Ella Kunar, Ella Personini, Sejal Sutliff, and Grayson Vogelmeyer. Come on up and congratulations on your 7th place. Just for the record, I'm not one of the Mag 7. It's a little outside my wheelhouse. All right, now on to, and by the way, if anyone has to go for the concert right now, feel free to leave. We understand, because it starts at 7. Granville Middle School Science Olympiad team competed at the Ohio Science Olympiad State Tournament and took home a fourth place trophy, just missing out on a trip to the national tournament. The 6th through 9th grade team has been working hard all year, studying, designing, researching, building, collaborating, testing, competing at tournaments, and has had the most successful season in the program's 9-year history. Granville medaled in 16 events at the track meet like hands-on STEM competition. But in 4, we won state championships. Yingling Lang, Abby Graham won the state championship in anatomy and physiology, showing their mastery of the structure and function of the digestive, respiratory, and immune systems. Good job. Yingling Yang and Kyler Katona won the state championship in fast facts, showing off their vast array of knowledge in categories like event. They started studying for this event last June, competing in weekly competitions all summer. Yingling Yang and Kyler Katona defended their 2022 state championship in green generation, demonstrating their superior understanding of the general ecological principles and history and consequences of human impact on our environment, solutions to reverse trends, and sustainability concepts. Congratulations to all those people just mentioned. And then we also have Owen Riney and Cole Reed, who won the state championship in Run It, Code It, in which they were given a computer program and had to reverse engineer and recreate it. In only their first year, Granville High School Science Olympiad team qualified and competed in the state tournament, which featured the top 40 teams from all over Ohio. The team placed 19th, finishing higher than large Columbus area schools such as Upper Arlington, 26th, and Dublin Coffin, 27th. Yay, not The competition consists of 23 events from various fields of science, including earth science, biology, chemistry, physics, and engineering. Granville medaled in 2 events and won the state championship in 1 event. Luke Hann and Ed Rutherford won the state championship in It's About Time, demonstrating their ingenuity and innovation in building a non-electrical timing device, a handmade clock, and showing their mastery in answering all time-related questions. In our first year ever, Granville finished 19th out of 40 teams and finished higher than those I mentioned earlier. I also want to recognize their advisors, Josh Grishow, who will never show up for any presentation that celebrates him, and Carl Kiefer, who is in the audience. So if you have been mentioned, please come up and get your picture.
right, you need you guys to swing over that way, just squish him a little bit more. Yes. All right, let's see if I can get the game there. All right, on three. 1, 2, 3.
All right. I have to say, I'm very impressed with the dedication of all our students. Almost all of the activities that we referenced tonight happen, before or after school, and they dedicate a lot of time and energy. The Science Olympiad group, I know, are in Mr. Gershow's classroom just about every night, working their tails off to master and learn more. So, congratulations, everyone. We know you have events to get to, so this concludes commendations. And what time is it? Yes, all right. Not too late. Thank you.
Tell them there are donuts. Okay, the next presentation, Mr. Burnett, I'm stepping in for him. He has a baseball commitment to be at. But it is our annual presentation of the federal funding. So this is a required federal presentation. We go through it every single year to talk a little bit about how we utilize our federal funding. It's not a huge revenue source, but it is important to document what it is and when we use it and how we use it. I will be tag teaming with Gwen Spence to talk a little bit about IDEA, which is special education funding, which is also a federal funding source. So our first federal fund is Title I, Part A, Serving Disadvantaged Youth. Our allocation for fiscal year 2023 is approximately $90,000. That's down about 10,000 or 10% from 2021. So we are seeing that it fluctuates with enrollment. Of disadvantaged youth. So our allocation is down from previous years. It's an income-based metric based on our free and reduced lunch population. There is a provision that we have to supplement and not supplant. That's a very standard language in federal procurement or federal regulations, meaning that you can't supplant something that you're already spending money on. It has to supplement that. They use a language called targeted assistance, which in our case, we target that for at-risk populations and at-risk students, including minority, homeless, foster care, academically at-risk, and low family income students. So how do we plan on spending Title I Part A funds? We use it for early literacy intervention. It partially supports the salaries of 2 district employees that we would not otherwise have available to us to provide literacy instruction and the support that they need at the early grade levels. We try and take the approach of early intervention is better than trying to remediate down the road. And then our free summer reading intervention of groups mentioned above that we could not offer in with other revenue streams. So those are the 2 ways that we spend the $90,000 worth of Title I federal funds. Title II Part A funds, improving teacher quality. So we receive an allocation from the federal government for professional development or capacity building of staff. That was approximately $35,000. 10% of that, over 10% of that goes to Granville Christian Academy as part of our allocation as far as what is it called? Non-public, thank you. Non-public schools participation. So the uses of the improving teacher quality monies can be to improve teacher quality, retention, preparation, and address class sizes and increasingly highly qualified teachers. That also does have a supplement and not supplant guideline. So how do we plan on spending Title II Part A funds? Professional development. So summer collaboration for staff in math and literacy, curriculum and instruction. Again, a lot of the things will align with, some of the funding will align with some of the requirements that come out of the state level that we are required trainings. We pay for the advanced placement summer institutes for staff and other PD in project-based learning, self-determined learning, dyslexia, science of reading, etc. So I was referencing that sometimes it pays for some of the instruction that's required at the state. So science of reading is the governor's priority, and we will use some of our Title II funds to solidify that. We also can use sub-coverage for in-house staff collaboration and PD. So if a group of teachers say, hey, we want to really focus on this area of building capacity, we can fund that initiative and that innovation for those individuals. So that's how we plan on spending our Title IIA. Yes, Cecilia?
So does Granville Christian have to spend the money, their part of the money in the same way?
Yes.
Okay.
All right, Title IV Part B funds, 21st Century Community Learning Centers. Our allocation was a whopping $10,000, and it is based on poverty and school performance measures. So it's actually an inverse relationship. If you're not performing well, you get more money. We're performing well, so we get less money. It allows for enrichment activities that complement the school core program, core subject areas, intervention, and other activities that can occur in or out of school. And we spend our Part B funds on technology devices for use in classrooms, and then also to support and enhance the fine and performing arts at all grade levels. So that is something that obviously is kind of the whole child aspect of the 21st Century Community Learning Centers. And then I'll let Gwen talk about the Title III and IDEA funds.
Good evening, everybody. So we also get Title III dollars, which is based on our English learners who are learning English as a second language. And we are actually part of a consortium group with the ESC of Central Ohio, because you have to be able to accept at least $10,000 to be an independent person in your Title III dollars. And since we are not at that level, given the number of students we have and the allocation we receive, we're part of the ESCCO. So they help develop what we do with some of those funds. So some of it goes to professional development. And then we have, we use a lot of our funds to supplement our classroom needs. So materials, software, things like that. That might be much more specific to our students who have English as a second language need. And then we participate in their consortium as well. And so at this point, we don't know what those dollar figures are going into fiscal year 24, but we have usually been right around that $2,000 mark for the most part with our English as a second language funds. Then we also receive federal money for our special education services. The allocation this year was just over $560,000. And again, here Granville Christian does have access to this. They can choose to take some of their IDEA funds and spend that. So what we do is we provide intervention services to a very small group of students over there, and they purchase the service through us. We have an intervention specialist that we contract with the Lincoln County ESC, who's assigned within Granville Christian and provides some services to a few students who have IEP-related needs there. This is also always, in the IDEA world, we are always 2 years in arrears. So it's based on our numbers from 2 years ago in special education. And like any other grant funds, this cannot be used for supplanting. It has to be supplementing our supports, and it can only be used for students who are identified as special education, because we are not identified as a district that needs to do early intervention and use our funds in a different way. So at this point, for many years now, our funds have been used to pay for additional intervention services, intervention specialist services, depending on where our funding falls with that. We also get additional federal funds for early childhood, again, based on our accounts, 2 years in arrears. So this past year it was around 9,000. And this just depends on the number of children we have in ages 3 to 5 who need special education. And remember that ours are provided by the Licking County ESC through Flying Colors. So this helps offset the cost of Flying Colors from a totality standpoint. And so all funds just flow straight to us, to Licking County ESC, to provide our preschool services over at Licking County. So that is all of our federal funds that we have for the district.
So another requirement of the federal process is that after we present, has to be an opportunity for public comment. So if anyone has a public comment specifically related to CCIP and the IDA and the federal funds, you can address the board now. Come to the podium, state your name and address. We will also have a public comment later, following the rest of our staff reports. Anybody up next? You're gonna make me turn around again.
Yeah.
Do you want me to look at it for you? There you go.
Okay, we are going to do a combined monthly financial report with the 5-year forecast today, just to kind of consolidate things. Since this forecast is put together, once we have April actual numbers, a lot of what I'll talk about is what I would have discussed in the monthly financial report. But there are separate printed copies that will be approved. So first, wanted to start off with just an overview of what is the 5-year forecast. And the forecast is required by the state to be approved by the Board of Education and submitted to the state twice a year, in November and then an update in May. And it's based on a series of assumptions that are outlined in the attached notes. And this is something that's changed recently, actually, that you have to include in the note for every single line item how you came up with your assumptions. So it has to be based off of something. So obviously in a forecast we know that it's going to be wrong, but we have to have some basis for those assumptions, and that's outlined in those notes. The assumptions are typically based off of historical trends, but then we also incorporate adjustments for known circumstances. For example, we know inflation is higher than what our historical trends show. We know that we have collective bargaining terms for the current year and the next 2 years. We also have enrollment data from the Cooperative Strategies report. So we incorporate all of those different known data points into these assumptions as well. It's also important to understand that this is a forecast, it is not a budget. There is a difference. It is not authorization to spend just because something is in the forecast and is approved. It still has to be budgeted for, which goes through a different process at the board level. And adjustments can be made as information becomes available. So we can submit updated versions of the forecast to the state in between the November and May submissions. But we also might just choose to update that information in our model and use it internally based on information that becomes available. So we have that flexibility. And really it acts as a transparency tool for long-term financial planning. We really look at the forecast when we're determining the need for new revenue sources, the need for additional staff, looking at it on a long-term, bigger picture basis. So that's the intent of the 5-year forecast. So what has changed in our assumptions since November? First, and probably most significantly, the income tax was renewed for an additional 5 years. So if you recall previously, we were always having to show that income tax renewal as a separate line item on the forecast. It was always represented by a different color and a different line. So now that that has been renewed, we have that all incorporated into one line item for the income tax revenue at this point. Current year assumptions are now more accurate. So we're 2 months out from the end of the fiscal year, so we have more information available to us. We know what our actual expenditures have been for a majority of the year. So this happens every year. The May version of the forecast is more accurate than what it was in November. That's the point of the May update. And then because a lot of our assumptions are based off of current year, those trends carry forward. So as we refine our projections for individual line items for the current year, when you apply the percentage increases that you're forecasting for future years, that carries forward. So all of those future years become a little bit more refined as well. And that does have an impact on the ending cash balance. So you'll see that that has improved with this version of the forecast. And then lastly, the major change for this version of the forecast is a switch on our maintenance and grounds positions and our computer tech position. So those were all previously outsourced and they would have been reported under the purchase service line item. Those are now coming in-house for next fiscal year, so those are going to be reported under salary and benefits. So there is an offset to purchase service. It's a switch between 2 line items on the forecast, but it is a material difference. So high level, looking at the forecast summary graph that we look at really every month now, total revenue on this graph is represented by the dark blue bars and then total expenditures by the light gray bars. 22 actuals are on here, and then 23 through 27 are the projected years. And then I have consolidated the lines, again, since we don't have to show the income tax renewal separately anymore. We just have one projected cash balance line. So that's represented by the green line. And then the blue and yellow lines represent the minimum and maximum cash balance policy threshold that we approved a couple of months ago. So what I want to highlight here is that for the current year, for fiscal year 2023, the green line is slightly above the blue line, which is the maximum. We anticipated that in November. We're continuing to see that now in May. But going forward, that green line dips back down and stays right between the blue and yellow for the rest of the forecasted years. So what that's indicating is that we are at a high point in cash in the 5-year cycle. And because we're staying above that yellow line, there's not a need for any additional new levies through the life of this forecast. So what that means is we'll have gone, or we're projecting to go 10 years without a new money request.
And that's specifically for operating
Correct,
money?
yes.
Yes.
Yes, thank you. I have that on a later slide, but I appreciate that clarification.
Can you explain just a little bit about how, since we are above that maximum cash balance, kind of the plan for why, for what's going to happen and why we don't need to make any specific changes right now, even though we are a little bit above?
Yes, I have slides to address that at the end, so we'll talk about that specifically because the policy requires the administration to present kind of a plan to the board. We have that as kind of a standalone report.
And can you just remind me one more time, what is the number of days, minimum and maximum?
It's 90 to 160. Okay, so showing the same information basically as the previous slide, but the actual numerical values here. Just wanted to highlight that the revenue or surplus line item here is what's important to pay attention to, because that's what's driving the change in the cash balance. That's why we're seeing a decrease, because we do have a couple of years where we are deficit spending in that individual year, meaning in that particular year our expenditures exceed our revenue. But because we have that carryover cash balance, our cash balance does remain positive through the life of the forecast. It's just a little, presenting the same information a little bit differently here so you can see that. So jumping into revenue, our three main sources of revenue are property tax, income tax, and state funding. So those are the three I'll talk about tonight. And historically, our total revenue has increased just under 6% over the last 5 years. And the reason why that is so high is because of the income tax. That was phased in over that period of time. If you don't have any new levy passed in your historical time period, that's going to be closer to what we're looking at for our forecasted trend. Because as we've talked about previously, we don't receive much growth in our main revenue source, which is property tax. We do have some growth in the income tax, which is why you're seeing a shift in that gray section of the bars on the left. That gray section is the income tax, so that's going from about 19.5% in 22 up to just under 22% in 27. So because the income tax grows at a slightly higher rate than our other sources of revenue, it's also growing as a percentage of the total pie. One thing to note on that though is when the time comes for an operating property tax down the road, that will shift the composition of the pie, and the income tax will decrease as a total, and the property tax will increase. So that's going to fluctuate over time. So looking at property tax to begin with, again, very minimal growth is expected because as property values increase due to reappraisal, so included in the forecast is a 30% increase for tax year 2023. Even with those values going up that much, tax rates are adjusted down so that the district does not collect additional revenue. So this is the House Bill 920 effect that we've talked about previously, and you can see it illustrated in the graph. You're looking at the graph going, what am I supposed to be seeing here? Well, you're supposed to be seeing flat bars all the way across because we don't see additional growth in property tax revenue over time. The only growth that comes is from new construction and inside millage, which our inside millage is relatively low for the general fund because we did an inside millage swap with the income tax. So we have a portion of our inside millage, which is in our permanent improvement fund, which doesn't show up here. So we actually see slightly less growth on property tax than other districts might see. So what is actually included in terms of our assumptions? So I mentioned the 30% increase in values due to reappraisal on residential. We also have new construction, assuming 60 new homes are built. And that goes back to our November analysis of the cooperative strategies data that was presented, as well as just known factors, known developments that we are aware of today. And then for commercial development, we have $500,000, which may not seem like a significant amount, but something that kind of clicked for me was to point out to everyone that that's the assessed value. So when we're talking about dollars for the forecast assumptions, we're always speaking in terms of assessed value changes. So that's actually only 35% of market value, which is what people would typically think about when they think about value of property. So I just wanted to highlight that. And that number may seem small. You may be thinking, well, with Intel coming, we're going to see more commercial development, and that very well may be, but we don't know of any of that right now. It's different than the residential builds where we have some data to suggest that that's actually happening. On the commercial side, we don't have as much of that data. There was some, about $3 million of commercial new construction for tax year 2022. However, it didn't really move the needle much. So you can see that even in 23, we didn't see a significant bump in our revenue even with that increase in new construction. We just don't see a lot of growth in this line item.
So that $500,000 is development, it is not coming, like revenue coming to us?
Correct.
Got it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
It's a new $1.5 million market value commercial business.
Right,
Which is also taxed at a higher rate though, so that's a significant factor.
yeah, yes.
Do you know what the median house price was for the 60 new builds per year, or what that was valued at?
I want to say it was around 600,000
Yeah.
was what we looked at.
And, you know, the number of new builds per year is sort of a significant factor in terms of our revenue because of the extra property tax you generate, but it also generates extra expense.
Right.
Right, so there's not as much sensitivity to that number, whether it be, 40 or 80 or 20 like it has been in the past and so forth, because it kind of also, in effect, has that same impact on expenses.
Yep, so it is really important to keep that 60 new builds in mind, because we talked about that in terms of what that means for students and our assumptions on the staffing side.
And historically, it's been 25 per year for the
Yeah.
last 20 years or something?
Yeah,
Not the last 20, because,
Park
we-
Trail,
yeah, we have the trail, the end of Park Trail.
I would say
Yeah.
last 10 years.
Yeah, last 10 years, yeah.
Yeah.
And- Sorry.
I was just gonna say, you do note that it's 60 per year, but that's 300 over 5 years, correct?
Yeah. Yeah.
Right, yeah,
It's a lot.
yeah, yep.
When you think about it.
And again, the sensitivity to that is, any one particular development can skew that 60 yield or 60 new homes pretty quickly. One of the things that we're tracking and always have been tracking is the development down near Heath that has been annexed. And I'm meeting with Mayor Johns on Wednesday, so to get any updates related to that project. So hopefully we continue to keep that open and collaborative process on the table.
Yeah, I think the 60 new builds per year is a good number to include in the forecast, but it's certainly not going to be linear and straight like that, right? This year there might not be 60. Next year there might be more, right? Less and so forth. So it's one of those things that grows sort of in spurts, but I think it's a very realistic assumption to guess that it will be more than it has been for the last 15 years. So I think that's a good number to include.
Yeah, and when you're looking at it over 5 years, if you have fluctuations like that between the years, especially on property tax, because it is delayed. So we have tax year, and then we have collection year, and then we have fiscal year, and those all are not aligned.
Yeah.
So it's a trickle-down effect, so any change in that is immaterial probably over the 5-year span. Okay. Next, moving on to income tax. So as we talked about, it's about 20% of our total revenue, going up slightly to 22% projected by the end of fiscal year 27. And unlike property tax, the income tax adjusts with the economic conditions of the community. So that means we are anticipating to see some growth in this line item. So we of course had the phase-in, which happened from 2019 to 2021. So we would anticipate that to grow over that 3-year span. But then we've also continued to see growth from 21 to 22, and then 22 into 23 as well. And so what are we including in terms of the actual assumptions? A 4% growth each year. And that is based on a 15-year historical trend. So because we have an all-income tax, we can look at statewide data to give us a better picture of what has income in the district done over a longer period of time, because it's pretty hard to base assumptions off of the last 4 years. I would say that's a pretty atypical situation given the pandemic. So the 4%, again, we know it's probably not going to be 4%. It might be less, it might be more, but that is a reasonable assumption based on our history. So the last major piece of revenue is our state funding. And we are in the last year of the current biennial budget, so we're going through that process for the next upcoming cycle. So we won't know for sure what is going to be in place come July 1st, so we are closely monitoring that as it moves through the legislature. However, we are on the guarantee, which means we are guaranteed to receive the same amount of funding that we did in fiscal year 2020. So it is, and that has been included in the governor's version of the budget, it's been included in the House version of the budget, So we would anticipate that that will stick and will ultimately be included in what is approved. So that means that we are, again, not anticipating significant growth in this line item. We do have some small growth because there are some components of the formula which are tied to enrollment, so we may see some slight increases due to enrollment growth. But in general, we are considered a wealthy district by any formula that is put in place at the state level, so we would not anticipate significant growth here.
So the guarantee.
Bless you.
The guarantee is an overall revenue guarantee, not a per student guarantee.
Yes.
But some components of the formula do adjust with enrollment. which is
Yes.
saying, is it half enrollment based, or is that just a small?
No, it's
portion
small
of the
add-on, like,
special features?
yeah, just for like transportation. So transportation is based on some of your actual data that we submit and report through the T1 and T2 reports each year. There's some adjustments for categorical spending, so special education number counts, English language counts, career tech, some of those components adjust with enrollment. But largely, yes, we're on the guarantee.
And a portion of the formula that the state uses based on income wealth and property wealth,
Right.
right? And property values are going to be going up in Grandview, which will make us more rich, right? And which will mean that the state will want to give us less money, but again, since we're on a guarantee, it will matter.
Correct.
Is that effectively a way to state that relative to our
It
value growth?
is, but I'll also say that the data that is used in the funding formula is always outdated. So, like, the property values going up for tax year 2023, I don't know exactly, but they don't come into effect for the actual calculation of state funding until probably 26, 27.
Yeah.
Like, it is so far behind with the data. So the biggest issue right now with the funding formula is trying to get them to update the input data from, currently they're using 2018 data, and trying to update that to like teacher salaries for 2022 would be great. So that's what, and that's making a huge huge difference for districts that are actually formula funded. Yeah, and like, what's the point of a formula if you're using data that's 4 and 5 years old, so.
But from a general perspective, I think the house values and the real estate values are going to continue going up more than average here in Granville,
Yeah.
which will not do us any favors in terms of getting state funding.
Correct.
But we are hopeful that the guarantee will remain in place.
Yes, yep,
Which will make it become effectively a smaller and smaller part of our overall budget.
yes. And even if there is a guarantee per pupil, that still won't hurt us. So there are some districts, so we're on the guarantee because of our wealth. There are some districts that are on the guarantee because they have declining enrollment. So if a guarantee per pupil were to be implemented, those districts would see loss in revenue because they would only be guaranteed X number per pupil and they have less pupils than they did previously. That's not the situation for us. That is just a straight wealth issue with the formula. So either way the guarantee goes, we would still see about flat revenue here. Okay. Okay, moving on to expenditures. So about 80% of our total budget, total forecast, is salary and benefits, so staffing. And historically, we have seen expenditures grow at about 2.8%, and we are forecasting 5.5%. And you're thinking, well, that's massive compared to the historical change. So there are three main drivers to that, which we'll talk about, but I'll just mention briefly. Enrollment growth, so adding additional staff is going to have an impact on that. We have an allocation in here for capital projects that we have not previously had to use operating money for, and then higher than historical inflation. So those are the three major components driving that higher than forecasted growth at a higher rate than history. And that's also typical. We typically see our forecasted growth to be higher than our history because it's a forecast. We are rather conservative in our forecast. That is why it is not a budget, it's a forecast. we would rather end at the end of the day, at the end of the fiscal year, with more cash on hand than less. So you would rather be in the position where your expenditures come in less than what you have forecasted than more. And that's why pretty much any forecast you're looking at, you're going to see something similar unless a district is going through major cuts or declining enrollment. So this is very common. Okay, so looking specifically at salaries, what assumptions do we have built in? We have steps and inflationary adjustments to base salaries. And that is based on known information for the next 2 years in our collective bargaining agreement. And then we also have built in additional teachers and staff to accommodate enrollment growth, not only next year, but into future years as well. And then lastly, we have the transition of, again, the maintenance and grounds staff from an external contract moving into the salary and benefits line item. So a lot of moving parts for fiscal year '24. There is an offset that you'll see on the purchase service line related to that transition. Any questions here? So benefits, a lot of the benefits are tied to staffing changes. You know, so you add additional staff, you have to add additional insurance plans, you have to account for the percentage for retirement, and so all of those are tied to staffing. But then additionally, we have medical insurance premiums, which really drive this line item. So in '23, we were lucky enough to have an 8% reduction in our medical insurance premiums. And that was our insurance carrier buying our business. So our claims did not necessarily warrant that decrease in premiums. And so we have a rate cap for 2024, which is 8%, and it is most likely going to be an 8% increase for 24. We are going to max that out. And then assumed for 25 through 27 is a 10% increase. And that, I would say, is a target maximum. Any change beyond that, we would want to address through some other means, through a plan design change, that kind of thing. So that's kind of a worst case scenario, hopefully. And then change what we have included in the collective bargaining agreement that's reflected here. Are changes to the employee and employer share of the premium. So increasing what employees pay as a percentage of the total premium to help share that burden of increasing costs, as well as reductions to the district's portion of HSA contributions. The final component here of expenditures, this is the catch-all of all other expenditures. So to give you a little bit more detail, because there's a lot that goes into here, I'm showing this graph because it shows it broken down by expenditure category. It's a little bit hard to see these numbers up here, but the blue is purchase service. So there is a slight decrease from 23 to 24. That's, again, bringing those contracts in-house. We're seeing the offset on salaries, so there's a slight decrease there. Orange is supplies and materials, so nothing really significant to discuss there. But then the green represents capital outlay. So that includes capital projects as well as land acquisition. So this was something that we started this year because our capital needs are exceeding what we have available in our permanent improvement fund. So projects just cost more. That was the whole HVAC project at the high school and the elementary that we also use ESSER funds for on top of that. So even between permanent improvement, ESSER, we still had to dip into operating funds to start covering that. So we anticipate that need continuing. Prices are not going down. We just got prices on school buses. Like if we agree to purchase some buses in July, we're gonna save $10,000 to $12,000 of what they're gonna be next year. So it's like, gosh, we really wanna try to take advantage of that while we can. So that is why we are really seeing this outlier in 24, because we have an allocation for land acquisition. So we've talked about this previously, but just to reiterate this, This is not a budget. This is not saying we are going to buy land. This is not saying how much we are going to buy land for. This is just a 5-year forecast. This is just a possibility. But we know that we are going to see enrollment growth. We know that our buildings are at capacity. We know we are going to need additional land. Before going the purchase route, we will take other avenues. We will, as Jeff said, work with other municipal partners, work with the developer to try to get donated land. We're going to take those opportunities before spending money out of operating funds to purchase land. But it's in the 5-year forecast.
Great, and that's one of the key things that came out of the strategic task force, which is a community-based group of people that really know a lot about development and things like that. Is that if ever you're gonna need it, the availability is going down and the prices are going up, right? So it's good to have that in there as a placeholder, if we should have the opportunity to be able to use it based on what we see with the enrollment trend. So.
And, just another comment on that is we probably don't just need one piece of land or room for one building. We're probably looking at 2 buildings for an elementary and a middle school. So if that number seems significant, that's why. It's more than one piece of property for one building. So given the significance of those capital projects, given our cash balance policy and how it is written, I wanted to present you with this concept of a capital projects fund. So what this would do, and it aligns perfectly with the forecast, so I wanted to talk about it. This is not being approved tonight. This is just a concept that fits in with the conversation of the forecast, so I wanted to present it now. But what the Capital Project Fund does is it's a way to accumulate funds specifically for acquisition, construction, and improvement of fixed assets. So it is a separate fund that would be outside of the 5-year forecast. The dollar value would still show up on the forecast, but it would show up as a transfer rather than capital outlay. And the reason why you would do this and transfer funds into the Capital Project Fund is it's a way to kind of create a savings account where you can have detailed accounting of what those capital projects are. When it's in the 5-year forecast, it's all lumped into capital outlay. There's really no more detail to it than that. In the Capital Projects Fund, we can create specific special cost centers that say this is for land, this is for roofing, this is for concrete. We can be as detailed as we want in a separate fund like this. It also allows us to save over multiple years. So in the 5-year forecast, you have to identify, here's how much you're going to spend in this specific year, and that's it. There's no flexibility to set aside money and kind of save for a larger scale project, whereas the Capital Project Fund would allow you to do that. But really the biggest benefit in terms of how it relates to the cash balance policy is it's going to avoid these huge fluctuations in our cash balance and operating expenditures. So in fiscal year 24, where we have that larger allocation for capital projects, our operating expenditure dollar value per day is higher in that individual year because we have that higher expenditure amount for capital projects. But that's for a capital project. It's not for operating. So it's really distorting that metric. So if we put that money into a capital project fund, that metric is going to be more accurate and really look only at our operating expenditures. And then that has the trickle-down effect of how the number of days of cash that we have on hand is calculated. Once your operating expenditure per day is more accurate, then your cash balance metric is more accurate as well. So that's important because we do have that board policy now where we are looking at those days of cash on hand. So I think there's multiple benefits to this type of a fund. So again, just wanted to kind of present this as a first presentation, being transparent with the public, as well as the opportunity for the board to consider this for the future. But again, we're just approving the forecast as it stands, which is with the allocation and capital outlay.
So those transfers would not be a part of operating expenditures that would show up, for example, per pupil and so forth, because they would be effectively permanent improvement kinds of things.
Correct. Yep.
And what I like about this structure is that it gives us a broader window of timing. I think a lot of people understand we're gonna grow. Not a lot of people understand when, including us. We're kind of watching the market and the metrics the best that we can to say when might that occur. So it gives us a little bit more flexibility to time the expenditures that we need to expend at the appropriate window.
Could we have done that with the athletic project as well, looking back?
Yeah, actually, we essentially did this. So it's a different fund number. It's not called a capital projects fund, but it is basically the same type of thing. So we actually did a transfer out of the general fund to the athletic complex for the district's portion. And then we did an advance for the private portion, and that ran through a separate fund. So we actually do have experience of this type of accounting. And if you recall with that project, we were still able to provide transparency into what our expenditures were. I still provided a monthly financial report that showed exactly how even the private and public portions of those funds were spent. So there's still a lot of transparency that you can have in the individual funds.
Now, in this, it says it must be used within 10 years. What would happen if there's excess fund after 10 years?
Yep, that's a great question too. So that's the nice thing about a capital projects fund rather than just a transfer to our permanent improvement fund. And I realize all of these terms kind of sound the same, but they are different. So unlike a transfer to the permanent improvement fund, this could be reversed. So if at the end of 10 years we haven't spent those funds, it could go back into the operating fund. It's a little bit of an accounting tracking issue because we'll have to track each transfer has a 10-year clock on it. So if we transfer $1 million next year, that has a separate 10-year clock than $1 million 2 years from now. So there's a lot of tracking that will be involved. But yeah, that's why this has some more flexibility. Okay, so it's something we can continue to talk about and discuss, but just wanted to get that in front of you today. So then moving on to our cash balance and specifically how we align with our cash balance policy and our specific recommendation. So we love the lines, the colorful lines on the bar graph to begin with, but I thought this was a nice way to really look at it and say, okay, where exactly are we in terms of the number of days? So for the current year, we're projecting to end at 180 days, which is a slight increase from where we were in November, but we knew we were going to exceed that high threshold. And then for the rest of the forecasted years, though, we are falling back within that range. So what does that mean? That again means that we are at a high point in cash. So we go through this cash balance cycle. We're still seeing the increase and the phase-in of the income tax, and that is carrying through. That's contributing to the cash balance for the current year. But then we're starting to spend that down. We're starting to see that decrease over time, which is what you can see here by the number of days of cash. So what does that mean for our formal recommendation? So we are recommending that we maintain current level of revenue for next year. We'll continue to monitor enrollment growth, continue to reevaluate things throughout next year. We'll have a November forecast, we'll have a May forecast. We look at it on a monthly basis. So we will continue to monitor that. But what this means by continuing the same level of revenue for next fiscal year is what we are doing is we are extending the time before a new operating levy request would be needed. So if we were to make any adjustments to revenue for next year, it would just have the opposite effect. It would decrease the time before a new operating revenue source would be needed. So that is a recommendation, maintain current revenue. We know that the cash balance is going to dip back down, and this really just, again, extends the time. We don't see the need for an operating levy through the life of this forecast. And that's what we're trying to accomplish. So to wrap things up, really the three main points of this forecast. Expenditures are increasing, and that's largely due to enrollment growth and inflation. So that's what's really driving that growth. Our cash balance is expected to fall within the board-approved range, with the exception of the current year that we just talked about, have the recommendation for. And there's no need for additional operating levy through the life of this forecast. So I feel like I have said all those things many times, but it takes a lot of repetition for some of this to sink in. I realize that not everybody deals with this every day, so just trying to be as clear as possible. So what additional questions or points, Jeff? Is there anything else?
I think you nailed it as always. I think, I get a lot of questions about growth and what's going to happen with growth and how that's going to impact us and things. I think from an operating perspective, it's a little bit self-adjusting, right? Like you get more houses and you get more property tax from them and so forth. Depends a little bit the value of the houses and the location of the houses and the age of the kids and how many kids and so forth, but it kind of just chunks along, right? There is the construction factor, right? The reality that our schools are kind of at maximum, and this is operating, not permanent improvement or bond. But, I think we've long known at some point we're going to need another building. And I think we even know exactly how many buildings we need. We just don't know when, right? So the important thing is to have a plan in place, right? A responsible plan so you can react to the growth appropriately, right? And I think that's the key. We don't know exactly when the development will come or whether it's going to be 60 or 20 or 100 houses a year and so forth. And that's where we got to put things in place, and the Capital Projects Fund is an interesting one. I'd like to hear the input of the Finance Committee and some other community members about that. But as a way to be able to react in this growth mode, right? Or be a way to be able to be prepared ahead of time, right? But not unnecessarily spend funds ahead of time. We don't want empty buildings out there. But that growth process is a challenging one, and it might mean, temporary school facilities or something like that for a period of time. Might mean a shuffle in grades, between one building and another. But I think, having passed the income tax is great that we only have one line in that part of our forecast, at least, because, I got the clear message that the community wants us to manage the growth, and we need to have the stability to do that. So great job updating this and so forth. I think we've been just as clear as always in an environment where things are tricky. State funding is tricky. And the assumptions that we make are really important. And we know we can't exactly predict what income or inflation will be with in the future, but I think we're well positioned, so I think this is a great report.
Yeah, thank you. And in terms of the bond, we do have current bond issues that are still outstanding that we're paying down on. And I think in a perfect world, we don't know when the timing of a new bond request would happen, but it would be great to align that with when the existing bonds fall off. So I think if we could pick a time for that to happen, it'd be great. I think that's 2028 maybe.
It is.
So yeah, that would be in a perfect world if we could align that. But even if it's not, it's only going to overlap for 1-2 years perhaps, if it needed to come before that. So that's something just to point out and keep in mind too.
Yeah, that's a really important kind of future date out there and things like that. And it seems like if we had something like a capital project funds, it might help you bridge that.
Right.
Right?
Right.
So I think that's, exactly kind of how we need to be thinking about this, is how can we make this, transition to growth as smooth as possible for the community and integrate in with things like the bond that's coming off for the intermediate school.
Yep.
So, yeah.
Great.
Any questions on the 5-year forecast? Otherwise, then we can have a chance to further discussion later, but
Yeah.
good
Okay.
job, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. That brings us to the time in our agenda where we welcome public comment. If anyone in the audience has something they'd like to share with the board, please feel free to step to the microphone, state your name and address, and speak for up to 5 minutes. Okay. Seeing none, I'll remind you that the board welcomes your input by email or phone or directly here at the board office with our administrators. Please feel free to reach out, and we look forward to keeping in touch. Which brings us to board discussion about the 5-year forecast. Jeff, any other comments from your point?
Yeah.
Kind of cue us up?
Yeah, so I Brittany has done a fantastic job of laying out the future forecast. You know, she hesitates to say multiple times, you know, it's a 5-year forecast, it's not a spending budget, or a budget to spend. But I think that's a really important point to make on a regular basis. I think we really should consider the recommendation of a capital fund, because I think that makes sense in a growth environment. And it doesn't necessarily, we still have the commitment for transparency, but it gives us a bigger window than just like 1 year. And even though it's showing up in 1 year, it could be 27 versus, you know, 24. So it just gives us a little bit of flexibility. But I also think that the challenge that we're facing right now is, you know, we do have the permanent improvement fund, and that has been increasing slightly over time, but it's not keeping pace with inflation, where projects are exponentially more expensive now than they were in the past. I think it's just a prudent thing to really consider, and you know, hopefully if we get direction from you, we could potentially put a board resolution on for you know, June or July if necessary, once we get feedback from the finance committee. But I think it is very helpful to have stability of funding revenue streams for the operation of a school district. Beyond, you know, we don't want 2 of the revenue streams or 3 of the revenue streams at risk. You know, it's good that the lowest revenue stream is the one that is debated every 2 years in the General Assembly, so that's good. So,
I think the thing for me that I feel so much better about the 5-year forecast is not that the numbers have really changed significantly one way or the other, but the stability of it has, right? Certainty about our income tax for the next 5 years is really important, and I'm glad that the public recognized that, so to give us that kind of flexibility. And some of the dynamics at the state level have also settled down somewhat. And so those things give me great confidence in our ability to make the right decisions now, and now is the time to make decisions about growth and make plans for them. We're not going to start digging up dirt, you know, right away until we know that that's the right time for the community and the students. But having that level of stability is really important, and is fantastic.
and just to make that point, this past week, we had 13 first graders enroll.
For next year.
For next year, additional.
Surprise.
So sometimes we see those bubbles occur where 13 kids come in, and that's almost a full classroom. So, you know, we do see some of that. Having that stability of funding helps us navigate those little bubble moments, where we can apply, you know, the appropriate staffing. So it's not just about the growth from a building perspective, it's navigating the staffing levels. And we always take the approach of reallocation first. We go through our process of determining need, reallocating existing resources, and only the last step is to add staff. But, you know, I think that having that stability of funding really does give us the ability to adjust when necessary.
That's been really important to manage kind of the bubble years that we've had. And it takes a lot of extra work on the part of staff to be changed from one grade level to another, or a building to another, and so forth. But I think we've kind of come up with a process to manage that on an ongoing basis, which is the right, responsible thing to do. So I think we've already got that in place, and I think our expectation should be the same, that we continue that kind of management of the growth, you know, as needed when needed.
How's kindergarten looking? Have there been changes?
It's down from last year, but closer to more typical numbers. But we will be reallocating some of the staff that we hired last year to different positions to accommodate the growth in other areas.
And will that little side building still be used?
Yes.
I just wanted to compliment Brittany and the staff for kind of being nimble and creative and showing us different things that we can do. I think the the athletic complex partnership was a great example, because every month you were able to show us what was going on. And I would fully expect, if we go forward with this projects fund, it'll be the same thing. So everyone in the community can see exactly what's going on with that. But I also like the idea, it gives us some flexibility. And I just want to compliment you for being forward-thinking and creative with this at the same time, because I think that's really important as to what Jeff was saying, because we know it's going to happen, we don't know when, yet.
The other thing that's just been a lot of work over the last year and things like that is just managing the uncertainty. You know, we didn't pass the renewal in November, and that caused us to make some decisions which have been really challenging, right? And we have to be kind of dynamic, and we have to be responsive to the community, and we clearly did that. We clearly came up with a plan that was the right thing going forward and so forth, and I think now, you know, we keep working the plan, you know, and we keep making plans for the future that we enact when it's necessary. So, thank you very much for all your extra work and all the time that everyone in the buildings has put in. So, anything else, forecast or plans?
No, I just think my comment is, my wife has never chided me for over-communicating anything to her. So, I think the fact that we continuously go through the financials every month and now have a more stable footing for our 5-year forecast, I appreciate all the work.
So something I heard as the levy campaign was running, I heard, concern that with more money, we would spend more money, and I feel that because sometimes, what's that expression where your money, it burns a hole in your pocket, But I do think like the capital projects fund would be a way for us to show that just because we have the money doesn't mean we're spending it on, random things that people spend money on when they have too much money in their pocket.
Yeah. Yeah. And by the way, also totally unrelated to the fiscal forecast is, we're hosting track events tomorrow for regional, and the revenue generation from Division 2 and 3, I think we're doing both, is another byproduct of the fact that we have a track and a stadium now that we can generate additional revenue. So again, good fiscal management.
Can you remind us what time those events will be? Like, will there be, I'm asking that specifically because there's a lot of concern around traffic right now around that
Yes.
area. However, the traffic really isn't bad unless you're there at pickup and drop off. So will it be the same for the track, or is it kind of coming and going?
No, it's gonna be bad. At 2 o'clock tomorrow, it will be bad.
Right.
Yeah. I want everyone to understand that.
Right.
Yeah, avoid Newburgh at around 2 o'clock unless you have to. And if your child wants to ride the bus, please allow them to do that.
Or bike.
Or bike, or walk,
I mean, maybe
yes.
not walk on
Yes.
First Street, but,
And one of the things that, we are tracking and working on closely is watching the Denison annexation process with the units that they are trying to get through village approval process. And again, traffic is a part of that study. There's a Denison study that, we're monitoring and looking at that area. I think infrastructure is going to be challenged in totality around Granville. When you think of, more population, buses do gum things up, but it tends to be episodic. So, we have windows of time where it can be a little challenging, but then it frees up. So we're interested to continue to look at those things and partner with the village and the township in ways that I think are advantageous to the entire community.
yeah, it might be nice to have more communication around those specific times. Like as a parent of children in 3 different schools, I understand what time is busy and what time is not busy, and I contribute to that. I am also part of the problem. But it might be nice for the whole community to know, okay, Loudon's gonna be really busy at this time, Newburgh is more busy at this time, that college, is really busy at this time, so,
Yeah.
attempting to avoid those if possible.
Yeah. And remember, we provide yellow busing yellow buses to all of our residents. So
Except
if you,
for my children.
yes. If you want to avoid traffic in totality, use the buses.
Which reduces the traffic congestion problem overall.
Yeah.
I'll say, I had an opportunity to attend a village council meeting that they have every other week, just as a listener to kind of listen in on that process and so forth. And it's great that our community organizations are also thinking about the future and trying to understand ways that they can facilitate, managing traffic in future roads and also pedestrian and cycling traffic and how that needs to be planned now, right? Because again, just the same way that availability of space for, school buildings is reducing, how you manage roads and where they go and how wide they are is going to become more and more challenging in the future where Granville has more weather, there'll be more traffic. So now is absolutely the time for all of us to work with our, organizations, the village and the township, and to make sure that they understand the priorities and the challenges that we face so that we can collaboratively come up with a good plan moving forward.
And just for the record, we are not in charge of water, sewer, or roads. I just want to make sure that that's clear as well.
Or commercial development, yeah. Thank you. I think that's it for sums up our discussion.
Oh,
Brad, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I had one more thing. I had the opportunity to go on a little tour of the middle school last week with Mrs. Ormond. And any opportunity we as a board can get in the schools, I think is wonderful, especially for someone who doesn't have children in the schools anymore. It's really exciting to see what's going on and the passion and commitment of our staff and the administrators. And there was one class that just, for this old timer, it's funny walking into classrooms and they all have Chromebooks. I'm like, where's the pile of books? I mean, it was just, but Mr. Broder's experiential learner mastermind class was amazing. There was a student in there composing a song. There was one building a computer. One had built an electronic bike. Somebody had designed and created this beautiful table they're going to use for podcasting that they're going to do out of this room from an old door. And he's building other furniture. And it was just, it was really exciting for me to see just what our schools do. And I wish everybody had the opportunity to see what our kids do. I went to the Chicago musical and it was fantastic. If you get a chance, go see our athletes participate, go see the arts. It's wonderful. And when you're my age, Granville's generous, it's free. You can go for free if you're 60 and over. So I just encourage everybody to take advantage of it. But I try to get around to all the schools and try not to be underfoot for any of the administrators. So, I'm conscious of that, but I can't say enough great stuff. And I just had the opportunity for the middle school last week, and I'm going to the elementary school this Friday. So I wanted to share that with the board.
The art show was cool too.
Oh,
Art show, yeah. And we are getting back into some field trips, so Mr. Stewart tomorrow at 5 a.m. is taking several 8th graders to Washington, D.C. for their annual trip. So that's after 3 years of not being able to do that. So that's, yeah. And he's looking forward to
Control your enthusiasm.
Yeah, he's
Great
excited.
trip.
Yeah.
It's a fun time.
All right. Great. I think that's the conclusion of board discussion. Move on to the action agenda.
Yes, all right, it is my pleasure to recommend 10.01, the 2022-2023 graduates of Granville High School.
Second.
We're very excited that we will graduate this class in about 2 weeks. Close.
It's a great list of kids. It's really neat to see, I have known many of them, coached soccer and things like that over the years and so forth. It was an honor to sign their diplomas, and it'll be an honor to see them walk across the stage here in a couple of weeks. So thank you for all you do to get them to this point.
It's a partnership. Okay.
Ms. Deeds?
Aye.
Mr. Crum?
Aye.
Ms. Shaw? Aye. Mr. Wolf?
Aye.
Mr. Miller?
Aye. Excellent, thank you. 10.02 is the communication support contract for 23-24.
So moved.
Second.
And the only thing that I would say is we continue to enjoy the partnership with Kane Learning for communication support. We are going to be looking at a website conversion next year, and so there is just a little additional funding for that conversion, because once they convert information, then it has to be tailored to the new format and template.
Great. Any more questions? That's great to have them as a resource. Roll, please.
Mr. Wolf?
Aye.
Ms. Shaw? Aye. Ms. Deeds? Aye. Mr. Crum?
Aye.
Mr. Miller?
Aye, thank you. 10.03 is the school-age childcare contract with Lovin Learning Child Care Center.
So moved.
Second.
We have increased the fee for the space by 5% for this next year. It has not been increased in a couple of years, so we felt like it was appropriate given inflation.
Any questions? The roll, please.
Ms. Deeds? Aye. Mr. Wolf?
Aye.
Mr. Crum?
Aye.
Ms. Shaw? Aye. Mr. Miller?
Aye. Thank you. The next item is 10.04, OSBA's web-based policies update service.
So moved.
Second.
And that is just to host our board policies on the website.
Better than managing that all ourselves. It's great they do such a nice job for us that's completely accessible to the public. Right?
Yes.
The roll, please.
Ms. Shaw? Aye. Mr. Wolf?
Aye.
Ms. Deeds? Aye. Mr. Crum?
Aye.
Mr. Miller?
Aye. Thank you. 10.05 is the approval of 2 student clubs, student-led clubs. So we have the fishing club and the gardening club at the intermediate school. And again, those are student-led, and we do not pay for the advisors.
That's great. The fishing club's got quite a following and so forth.
If there's ever an advisor needed, I volunteer.
Garden or fishing?
I would, no, fishing. Yeah, Jim Redding and I would have to arm wrestle, and I think you'll win.
The roll, please.
Mr. Crum?
Aye.
Ms. Deeds? Aye. Ms. Shaw? Aye. Mr. Wolf?
Aye.
Mr. Miller?
Aye. 10.06, the Alliance for High Quality Education dues.
So moved. Second.
This is the organization that I chair for advocacy related to the budget process and other items going through the General Assembly, and we are knee-deep in those processes right now, so,
Super helpful to get those updates.
yes.
Have things stabilized somewhat? Or is there more certainty about the process of the forecasts and the House bills that are out there and so forth?
So,
I know that's not.
yeah, I think there's some general level set across the House, the governor, and the Senate versions, but there are tweaks that are being negotiated. But it's generally more favorable than in the past. It's just nuanced, like getting the inputs is huge. The Alliance has advocated for a funding floor. Right now it's at 5%. We're advocating that it goes to 10% and then 20%, which kind of helps with that guarantee issue if that were ever to go away. There's actually 4 guarantees. Brittany mentioned the 2, but those are topics of conversation that are ongoing with our General Assembly. So now it's in the Senate, and once it comes out of the Senate, then it will probably go to conference committee, and we'll have a budget by June 30th. But Brittany's better at that process than I am.
Thanks for the update. Can take the roll on that.
Ms. Deeds? Aye. Ms. Shaw? Aye. Mr. Crum?
Aye.
Mr. Wolf?
Aye.
Mr. Miller?
Aye. Thank you. 10.07, the Ohio Guidestone contract.
So moved. Second.
I am going to talk a little bit more about this contract because I think it's been a significant value add for the organization since we've developed that partnership. Carissa is one of their employees that's co-located in the middle school. I would receive multiple calls a year, a week, from parents really struggling to find access to services. And we brought Ohio Guidestone to be kind of a bridge for those parents to help them. They're truly in need of support and help. And Carissa has done a fantastic job of not only being a bridge, but also, being the provider. And, we've tried to incrementally improve that contract and expand that contract. There is a billing component that is outside of this contract as well, which keeps costs somewhat down for us, but it has been a significant improvement of services beyond what the school staff can do on a regular basis. So, huge value add.
Yeah, it's a fantastic resource at a time that it's much needed, so. Okay, the roll, please.
Mr. Wolf?
Aye.
Mr. Cronk?
Aye.
Ms. Deeds? Aye. Ms. Shaw? Aye. Mr. Miller?
Aye. Next item is 10.8, the Licking County ESC contracts for general service contracts and early education services with children with disabilities that Gwen referenced earlier.
So moved. Second.
Nothing more to add?
Thanks for the presentation. Yeah, the roll, please.
Ms. Deeds?
Aye.
Ms. Shaw? Aye. Mr. Cronk?
Aye.
Mr. Wolf?
Aye.
Mr. Miller?
Aye, thank you. 10.09 is the Learning Spectrum contract for 23-24.
So moved.
Second.
And this is a contract for students with special needs.
No questions here. Roll, please.
Mr. Wolf?
Aye.
Ms. Shaw? Aye. Ms. Deeds?
Aye.
Mr. Cronk?
Aye.
Mr. Miller?
Aye. Item 10.10 is the approval of job descriptions.
So moved. Second.
Who we give it to?
Ladies first.
Okay. All right. All right, so if you recall, and there's an item down on the consent agenda where Tanya is leaving us, she's resigning to take a position at Southwest Licking. But one of the items that we were planning on doing was separating HR and operations. Those are a combined position right now. And honestly, with the additional requirements that are constantly placed on, human resources or on operations for reporting and compliance, it really was time to separate those. Unfortunately, we lost time in the process, but we are separating those and posting them individually, and so these are the approval of the two job descriptions. And we currently have an operations role that was embedded into the service contract that is being pulled out of that contract to kind of offset the cost.
I think that's great timing, actually, that we can integrate that operations role into that maintenance staff role as well. And hopefully we can find the right people for both of these.
Yes.
I think they're great opportunities for people to grow with the organization.
Thank you.
Any other questions? The roll, please.
Mr. Wolf?
Aye.
Ms. Shaw? Aye. Ms. Deeds?
Aye.
Mr. Cronk?
Aye.
Mr. Miller?
Aye. Okay, the consent agenda, just to highlight the change that I noted at the beginning of the meeting, Molly McClenathan is actually resigning her position as the Granville Middle School school counselor, which is the addendum C17. So that is also C1 under one-year contracts. So I just wanted to bring that to your attention. The other items that I wanted to highlight,
Do we have a motion
Yeah.
for, thank you.
So moved. Second.
thank you, Thomas, I apologize,
No problem.
went right into it. Acceptance of donations and gifts, we have a science kit valued at $250 from Owens Corning Science and Technology, a
We also received an Ohio EPA water bottle filling station grant of almost $10,000. Thank you, Tanya, for submitting that grant on our behalf.
What building is that for? Or is that-
That's for all buildings.
Because we have a couple of filling
Yeah.
stations, but that's more upgrading our fountains and things like that.
Yeah,
Adding additional.
adding additional ones.
Great.
Yeah, which is good.
Yeah.
That's,
Yeah.
we prefer that methodology.
Yeah.
We have, it's kind of a long consent agenda because we have a lot of our annual contract renewals, so 1 year, 2 year, 3 year contracts and continuing contracts for certified. We have our classified contract renewals, 1 and 2 years, and an exempt employee contract renewal for EMIS. We have 4 of our administrative contract renewals. We have the stipend for this past year and the year moving forward for the district communication support. We have a whole list of people that will be working on our district PBIS, which is our Positive Behavioral Intervention Supports team. So we are paying out that stipend. We have a whole list of people that are willing to sub for us next year, which is excellent. Extended year contracts, extended time contracts for the summer work. And then Brittany has an
Yeah.
update related to her position.
So we are recommending Kim Pulley for the assistant treasurer position. We are stealing her from a neighboring district, which I'm very excited about. So Kim is going to be able to start with us full-time August 1st. She has some transition days that you're also approving in July, so that will be helpful because Donna will be done the last week of June. So we will continue to be short-staffed until August, but really excited to be bringing Kim on board. And again, as a reminder, this is still 1 position to replace 2. So it's still a great deal.
And she currently has her treasurer's license.
Yes. Yeah, that's fantastic to be able to resource that as a true assistant treasurer and things like that, and the efficiency that you've built by, working on our system so much over the last years has really enabled us to be, have less staff and save a lot of money on an ongoing basis, in addition to all the visibility to the data and the important tracking that it does from an accounting perspective. So I think this really kind of does a great job of replacing, again, those 2 roles that we were missing in the treasurer's office, and it gives me a lot of confidence moving forward that we're going to have the support we need there. So thanks for that process, going through that, and very much looking forward to welcoming Kim to the team.
And then finally, the resignations and retirements. We have Tanya Sherburne, the Director of Human Resources and Operations. She is leaving us effective July 31st. And then we have Carol Higgins and Kim Clary, who are retiring. Kim has been here for almost 27 years. Carol has been here forever as well. And, so we are going to tremendously miss them. And, Kim has been masterful at navigating very tight infrastructure and getting our buses routed appropriately. So with recognition and service, appreciation of service for those 2 individuals. And then, I also want to, we're going to have some transition with a new transportation supervisor, new people in HR and operations. Tanya has, as I describe it, taken us from more of a mom and pop shop to a small business model to, putting the structures in place for great hiring decisions. She's been in charge of the safety committee. She's taking control of the resources and operations committee. She has added so many different ways to this organization. She will be a tremendous loss to us, but we look forward to her replacement. But we certainly appreciate her level of commitment to this organization over the last almost 9 years.
So, and Kim as well,
Yes.
putting the new bus tracking system this year and things like that has set us up for success in the future. She's done a great job of stabilizing that organization in very tough times. And so we look forward to someone to step into that role, but it will be big shoes to fill for sure, and we certainly wish her the best.
Yes. And then we have some travel to approve. And that is a long list of consent agenda items.
Questions or comments on any of those? I don't think so. Roll, please.
Ms. Deeds? Ms. Shaw? Mr. Cron?
Aye.
Mr. Wolf?
Aye.
Mr. Miller?
Aye.
Okay, and that brings us to item 14.01, approval of the April 2023 financial report. So moved.
Second.
So the only thing that I will say about that, you have the printed copy, and that will be on the website as well. But we received our final income tax payment for this year in April. That was in alignment with the forecast. It was about, in total, the income tax was about a 5% increase over last fiscal year. So I didn't mention that during the forecast presentation, but that would have been the highlight for the April financial report.
5% compared to last year. And we have a 4% in the forecast? That's probably pretty reasonable.
Yeah.
Any questions about this month's financial statement? No? Roll, please.
Ms. Shaw? Aye. Mr. Wolf?
Aye.
Ms. Deeds? Aye. Mr. Cron?
Aye.
Mr. Miller?
Aye. Oh, sorry.
I was jumping right in.
Item 14.02, approval of the 5-year forecast. So moved.
Second.
Any additional questions or comments on the 5-year forecast?
Just a comment that you do a great job with visualization of the data for those of us in all the community that, are trying to put all these things together. It's clear that you truly understand a lot of the school finance that's behind this, and you're really helping us all out getting through the process of coming up to speed with that. Especially appreciate all my questions that I hassle you with on a daily basis on various assumptions and things like that. So thanks for putting up with me, and thanks for doing a great job in that forecast. It's the right thing going forward for us.
So I was in a high school class today, and they were asking me questions about the 5-year forecast and wanted to know how many pages the 5-year forecast was. I said, well, the forecast itself is only 1 page, but the notes are about 20-some pages. And they're like, oh, they weren't going to read that. I said, it's mostly pictures, like it's all graphs, so you can do it if you want.
You should send them the annual financial report.
Oh, that would be a stretch.
Yeah. That's great that you're in there with the school, though. Thank you so much for doing that and connecting with students. Hopefully it's rewarding.
Yeah, that's fun.
Any other questions on the 5-year forecast? No? The roll, please.
Ms. Deeds? Aye. Mr. Cron?
Aye.
Ms. Shaw? Aye. Mr. Wolf?
Aye.
Mr. Miller?
Aye.
Item 14.03, approval to establish accounts. So moved.
Second.
So this is associated with the EPA grant that we received, as well as the 2 student activity accounts, so approving the setup of the accounting side of those 3 activities.
Good idea. The roll, please.
Ms. Shaw? Aye. Ms. Deeds? Aye. Mr. Cron?
Aye.
Mr. Wolf?
Aye.
Mr. Miller?
Aye.
Item 14.04, resolution authorizing payment in lieu of transportation.
So moved.
Second.
This is a part of a 2-step process. The first step we approved several months ago, which is declaring transportation impractical for certain individuals attending non-public schools outside of the district that we would otherwise have to provide transportation to. The parents provide transportation, and then we essentially pay a stipend to the parents for that service. So it's a good deal financially for the district.
That's the right thing to do now. The roll, please.
Mr. Cron?
Aye.
Mr. Wolf?
Aye.
Ms. Deeds? Aye. Ms. Shaw? Aye. Mr. Miller?
Aye. I'd like to entertain a motion to consider the employment and compensation of public employees or officials.
So moved.
Second.
The roll, please.
Ms. Shaw? Aye. Mr. Cron?
Aye.
Ms. Deeds? Aye. Mr. Wolf?
Aye.
Mr. Miller?
Aye. There will be no action items after the executive session, so we'll excuse ourselves and thank you all for your participation.